Style of play to change the aesthetic of the game. We had a similar conversation here yesterday on the Garden Report. Bobby Manning, Noah Dalzell from Celtics practice, and Adam Silver before yesterday's NBA Cup final weighed in on a growing debate about the three-point shots increasing relevance in the NBA game, saying the answer is yes. We're having main discussions about the style of basketball being played. I would not reduce it to a so-called three-point shooting issue. I think we look more holistically at the skill level on the floor, the diversity of offense, the fan perception of the game, all of the above. I think the game's in a great place. I love watching the games, and I think we have some of the most skilled athletes in the world competing, and it's unfair, I think, to the players to lump them into categories as three-point shooters, a mid-range shooter, or a big man playing under the basket. It's an amazing game. And Silva did go on to say that they're looking at a bunch of different things here. There could be changes, probably not going to be the three-point line distance, but leaving open the chance that they could adjust the cookie cutter style of play, which is what I think he gave the most leniency to their becoming, and having that diversity and skill in the game, which is, I think, where they've accomplished the best coming from the 90s and the 2000s with all the rule changes that they made previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to be looking at the evolution of the sport. And I know Adam Silver's talked about how, one of the reasons why they got rid of, they wanted to be a little bit stronger on calling hand checks and things is so a guy like Steph Curry can be an all-time great. And there's a world where he can't survive in the NBA, right? So I think it's smart to always be evaluating the sport. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of discourse around three-pointers. I think that what bothers fans is when everything looks the same. And so it's less about three-pointers. It's more about if you're turning on TV and you're watching the games and it feels like every possession's the same, every team plays the same. And I actually don't think that's true, but I understand where it comes from. I think that a lot of teams have different styles of play, but that differences are a little bit more nuanced. And part of it needs to be explained better to fans. I think if you watch a football game, I think the announcers do a pretty good job of explaining the technical things that are happening on the court that maybe aren't so obvious to the casual viewer. And I don't know that basketball has the same level of detail as well. So part of it, I think, there is more differences, I guess, across teams and across even individual games, but they're not as obvious to watch unless you're literally like studying these teams and watching them night in, night out. I think that's a place where that could be expanded upon as well.
Joe Mazzulla responded to Silver's comments about the possibility of rules being changed there, and didn't seem to be in favor of adjustments to the rules regarding threes. Here's what he had to say.
I don't know. What's your take? It's an interesting perspective, I think, because in the NFL, people aren't like, I want to see less scoring. They're not going to make the end zone smaller. They're not going to make the field smaller. So, scoring is up across in other sports. And I guess my question would be is why in basketball is scoring up being an issue as opposed to other sports? Does anybody want to watch a football game and see less touchdowns? So I think at the end of the day, I think, anything new or change is different, but, I don't know.
So I don't quite get the comparison there. I think the right comparison right now in terms of what's being discussed in football or the amount of two-pointers teams are going for, the amount of fourth downs teams are going for, just the same line of thinking, right, that you're getting extra points, you're getting extra offense over the long run by going for those attempts that might be a little more risky, might be a little more high variance than some of the safer plays there. Now, there's more, I think, disparity about whether you should go for those plays or not in football. In basketball, I think what's happening here is that everyone's looking at if you shoot more threes, you're going to score more, you're going to be more efficient, and almost every team's going in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the math. It makes sense 99% of the time. And so eventually teams are going to structure their rosters more and more to have three-point shooters. And we're seeing teams trying to emulate the Celtics right now, and they're not built to emulate the Celtics.
Chicago's going to do it over the next few
Right, and
days.
so you see teams beginning to recognize the math equation. And I think if you're a coach that doesn't love the numbers and doesn't love looking at analytics, you're probably not going to survive very long because at the end of the day, the analytics are going to win out. But I think we do need to do a better job of highlighting the fact that there's plenty of teams that actually aren't completely playing this style as well. Like watching Oklahoma City yesterday, you like mid-range basketball. There are some really phenomenal mid-range players there still.
I think the Knicks have a different look to them.
Yeah, the Knicks. I mean, even Giannis and Jokic, two of the best players in the league. They're certainly not perpetuating this three-point shooting offense. Although Jokic is shooting lights out this year, but I think so. There is more diversity than maybe people are giving it credit for. Then you see the highlight or the lowlights of teams like I forget who the Hornets played recently, but they broke a record for most missed threes in a game. And I think that those little clips, the those go viral on Twitter of a bunch of people chucking threes and missing. That starts to dominate the discourse if you're actually watching these games night in and night out. There are stylistic differences, and whether we want more stylistic differences, I think that's a valid question. And probably as everybody becomes a better shooter, like there's going to be some need for intervention. I still think it's a little bit overblown, this discussion around the three-pointers, and that's what's making the game get bogged down.
I think they got to look at it, and I don't know what the solution would be. Obviously, the big ones we've kicked around have been getting rid of the corner three, which I don't think is super realistic.
Yeah.
Three-point dunk, I'm intrigued by a little bit. How that
Dunks
would
being worth
change
3 points.
Yeah, how that would just change the decision-making out there, or maybe even some of the personnel you would be putting on the floor. And beyond that, I mean, I don't know how you make the mid-ranger come back, because that's what people are vying for here, right? Who want to see an older style of basketball return are some of those mid-range guys like Kobe, like Melo. I think when you think about Tatum, too, like he's a guy who probably has a mid-range skill set who's just had to abandon it because of the math.
Yeah, I guess, is that the number one thing that people have problems with? The fact that
Post-ups,
people aren't
no more post-ups.
I think the post-ups are missing a little bit more, because stylistically the post-ups provide an element that's so different.
You don't see Al Jefferson.
Yeah, right.
Anymore.
And honestly, covering the WNBA, like the WNBA is still played through the post. The best players are all post players. You see very traditional, like 80s style.
So you've made that point before that the WNBA has this older school style, but it's still not as popular as people would say it would be, like that style of play.
And I think there's a million reasons why the WNBA, has dealt with popularity issues over the years. But I also will say, like, covering both leagues quite a bit, I think people also just like to hate. Like, people like to point out the things that are missing from leagues. Like, all of a sudden when we're talking about the WNBA, it's like, why can't they dunk? That's the big discourse. And then you watch the NBA. I mean, guys can jump higher and dunk better than ever before. And it's like we're kind of taking that for granted. And instead, we're focusing on the thing that's now missing from the offense. And so I think we're always part of like the social media world, and part of the way that sports media has kind of shifted towards negativity is that we're always focusing on the things that are quote unquote missing from the game, and missing out on the fact that there's a lot of like really incredible things happening. I personally don't find dunking that exciting. I love three-pointers, so I like the evolution.
So you like Edwards taking most of his shots from three instead of playing around the basket athletically?
I mean, I think he's doing both, right?
But he's moving in that three-point direction pretty drastically.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, like, I think the great in-game dunkers are still going to provide you with a couple of those plays a game, or maybe I'm thinking Jaylen Brown here. Like, he's certainly taking a lot more threes.
Him. Like, he stylistically is so different from everyone else on the team.
He stylistically, and I think that he has great highlight dunks, but the evolution of the game shifting towards three-pointers has not eliminated those dunks from his arsenal. Like, he's just making the rim reads that we talk about all the time, and I think more often than not the correct read is to pass, but there are still opportunities to dunk when it's not somebody that's going to block him, right? And I think he leans on the side of like liking that pressure. So I don't know. I mean, I do think you don't want to get to the point where everybody's doing the exact same thing, and I think that is the biggest qualm people have. Everybody loved when Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were shooting threes because it was their thing, and now if it's 11 guys on your team's thing, it makes it's not as much of a commodity anymore. So I totally understand like that critique, but I still think like we're not paying attention to the fact that there's plenty of people out there doing things that are different than just three-point shooting, and that's kind of getting lost. I mean, watching the NBA Cup game last night, like there was a lot going on the floor that had nothing to do with the evolution of the three-point game, and I don't know if people are necessarily noticing or highlighting that.
Well, when people see Giannis throw up a three, when people see LeBron throw up a three, and he's gotten better at it, I think that's when they're like, oh, is this the best shot? Is this the best move in those situations? I enjoy watching the game. I don't love the cookie-cutter approach and everybody having to go in that direction, even guys who it's not supernatural for. So there does have to be some balance. Again, I'm not in favor of anything drastic, but I do think you have to take a look at it. Other notes from today, Kristaps Porzingis. Sounds like he'll be good to go tomorrow. Went through practice today, looked good, felt good. They're going to see how he's feeling before the game, and we're finally back to game action. Celtics Bulls, first of 2 games in 3 days for those two between Boston and Chicago, so we'll have coverage of it all starting back here tomorrow morning with shoot-around. So check out all our coverage over on CLNS Media, Celtics All Access. All-time Joe session today, in my opinion, and capped off by him saying we're probably bored at this point. By the time it ended, we were talking about cricket for some reason or another. So go check that out as well. Check out Prize Picks. Go get your bonus over there with the code CLNS. And check out the Game Time app for all the tickets to the Celtics and Bulls in Boston and Chicago tomorrow. Use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase over there. Terms apply for Noah Dalzell. I'm Bobby Manning. NBA Cup finally over. The Bucks won. I was right.
That's true. Yeah.
And
it wasn't close.
And I loved seeing Giannis add that to his list of accomplishments, even if you don't think it is one. So anyway, we're back with real regular season action tomorrow, and we'll talk to you after the game on Celtics postgame.